Hello everyone and welcome to Rachel Leroy's YouTube channel, which is Christian Emotional Recovery. And of course, I'm your host, Rachel Leroy, and this is a YouTube video about the family roles and relationships in a narcissistic family dynamic. So we'll talk about today the family roles and relationships in a narcissistic family dynamic. And like I said, I don't like to obsess with narcissism and narcissists, but I do think it's important to educate people about the roles that narcissists play in abuse and in mistreatment and in trauma, particularly for trauma survivors, and how you can learn about those, protect yourself, and move on to live the life that God intended you to live. So this isn't about going down a rabbit hole and obsessing as much as it is about educating ourselves and putting this information into practice to empower yourself, to protect yourself and those that you love that might be in situations like this, to love everybody in the situation, including potentially the narcissist in your life if you have to live with them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those different roles and dynamics today. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. First, if you haven't, please click the subscribe bell. Click on the subscribe bell and you will get notifications for every new YouTube video and every new podcast episode that comes out, because I also put the podcast episodes in a playlist called Podcasts on the channel, so you can always get them there, and you can also get them at your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you would like to support the platform, what I do takes a lot of time, and there is finances that are invested into it, and it can be difficult to keep up some months, and so I appreciate my supporters. I appreciate you so much, but if you would like to donate, if you would like to help the ministry and help me to help more survivors like yourself, you're helping me to get the word out to more people. You're helping me to be able to help more people. You can go to the Patreon account. I'll put that in the show notes, the extra notes that are in the YouTube video or the show notes that are in the podcast. And you can see that under Patreon. You can give. There's no obligation. You don't have to, but I appreciate anybody who's able to give. And you can cancel at any time, but you subscribe and you can give anywhere from $5 to $10 to $25, all the $50 and $100 a month. And I greatly appreciate it. I have people that'll make a year commitment, and those people are so greatly appreciated. And I love you all, but thank you so much. And then if you would like to donate one time, if you're not able to donate monthly, you can also donate one time any amount. It can be anywhere from $5 to any amount above that, whatever you want to give. And it's at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. It's a trustworthy website. I'll also link that in the show notes, okay? Also, if you haven't, go check out the Facebook group, Christian Emotional Recovery, Trauma Survivors Unite. Check out the website, christianemotionalrecovery.com, which houses the website and has other goodies, including freebies. And also go to rachelleroy.com, where you can check out the store, rachelleroy.com. You can check out the store. I'll link all those in the show notes, and you can check those out as well. And not only is there a store, but you can also subscribe to the newsletter, and you can also get a free infographic on the ACORN technique for dealing with difficult emotions. So let's go ahead and jump in. I don't want to go on forever. Thank you so much for following me. So what we're going to talk about with the family roles and relationships in the narcissistic family dynamic. First, we'll talk about children and sibling roles in that dynamic. And then we'll talk about narcissistic family dynamics themselves. Now, when I say a narcissistic family, that doesn't mean everybody in the family is necessarily a narcissist. There may be one, there may be two. It might be part of the family. It might be everybody but one person. And I really feel for those people. And like I said, this isn't to degrade somebody who might be categorized as a narcissist. Anybody can heal if they want to get help. That's the whole issue here, is that narcissists often are not wired and or are not capable of making the choice to heal. I'm talking about full-blown narcissists. I'm not talking about people that may have strong narcissistic traits and they can be jerks more than an average person, but they're also capable of looking inside of themselves and saying, hey, I can be a real a-hole. Maybe I should work on myself. Some people are not capable of doing that. Like, they don't have the wiring. I don't know why. I don't understand it. I don't know how you interpret that biblically. I do know that the behaviors of extreme narcissism go along with the behaviors of what the Bible talks about when it comes to rebel rousers, boat rockers, people that are involved in sin and corruption and greed and manipulation. You get the idea. You get the idea. But so we're talking about the family dynamics here next, and we're talking about the general roles in narcissistic family dynamics. What are some of those more general roles? And it kind of goes with the previous category of sibling roles, children roles, because some of these overlap. Some of the roles can be parents and children, and some of them are mainly children. I'm focusing for the sake of this more on the child, because a lot of us here are adult codependent survivors of alcoholic and or narcissistic families and parents and caretakers. And so this is really what I'm focusing on in this platform, in this podcast more. Not that I'm not focusing on some of the other stuff. And so the next one is the unwritten rules of narcissistic family dynamic. The unwritten rules of a narcissistic family dynamic. And then when a sibling is a narcissist and when a parent is a narcissist. So we'll talk about the children's roles, the siblings' roles in narcissistic family dynamics. Then we'll go more into the dynamic itself, narcissistic family dynamics. Under that umbrella, we'll talk about the structure of a narcissistic family dynamic, general roles in the narcissistic family dynamic, unwritten rules of a narcissistic family dynamic, and when a sibling or a parent is a narcissist. We'll talk about each of those separately. So let's jump right in. And I'm using visuals if you're on the YouTube channel. And if you're I'm making this a crossover episode, so I'm also putting it on the podcast. So if you want to see the visuals here, just go to the YouTube video. You will go to the YouTube video. You can type in the title and you'll see it in a YouTube version. So keep that in mind as we're going along. Okay. So I, as always, have resources, and as always, I will put those in the show notes so you can read any of them. You can look at the links that those have as well, and you can look at these resources and read them to learn more about narcissistic family dynamics. So, like I said, it's one thing to talk about narcissistic relationships and different types of narcissists in a video slash YouTube, in a YouTube slash podcast, I did or am talking about, I'm not sure which comes out first, but I'm talking about the different types of narcissists. So we're breaking that down as well. But I wanted to go a little more into this because I wanted you to see how it all connects. How does this work in a family dynamic? So there's an article here from Sentient Counseling. Sentient Counseling. I was trying to see if there was an author of this one. I don't see a name. But Sentient Counseling is the source where this comes from. And this is based in the UK. I get a lot of good sources from all over the world. And then, so let's just jump right into some of the roles in a narcissistic family. Now, some of these are parents, but they also talk about the children a lot. So I wanted to talk about some of those different roles. First, you have the enabler, and they say it's a weak-willed person. I don't know if that's a nice way of putting it, but maybe so. Yeah, they're generally a codependent partner of the narcissist who will do anything to appease them. And there is nothing, and they do nothing when the narcissist is in a rage as they, and accept as normal any humiliation dished out to them, whether in fear or with a nervous laugh. So this makes it sound like it's coming from the parent's role, that maybe one's a narcissist and the other one is an enabler. And those people aren't just the ones that kind of run away or don't want to have anything to do with the family. Those are usually the ones that can actually become flying monkeys. And if you don't know what a flying monkey is somebody who not only hovers around the narcissist, but actually goes to the people that they're abusing and tries to push down their boundaries and tries to, they send those people in to try to do their dirty work. And sometimes the flying monkey is truly unaware of the harm they're doing and truly unaware of what's really happening. And in other cases, they're fully aware of it and they don't care. And so the enabler is kind of that role. And I think it could be a parent or a child, because you might have siblings, several siblings, and you might have one sibling enabling and sort of bowing down to a narcissistic other sibling, and then another one might be aware of what's going on, and they might team up on the one that's more aware. And you might have had that experience of different family roles. So the next one is the golden child, and that's the child is seen as an extension of the parent and treated as the favorite. They live vicariously through the parent and vice versa. They can be manipulative, employing bullying tactics towards their siblings and others when there's no one around to catch them. There are a lot of expectations on the child to be perfect in order to make the parent look good. That doesn't necessarily mean that the golden child is always a narcissist. That's not true. I've actually seen in some cases where the narcissistic child was badly behaved and the parents would constantly discipline that child and not like them. And then the well-behaved child was more codependent and just kind of smoothed over conflict and always did what they were told, and they actually became the golden child. But what happens in more cases is that the narcissistic child becomes the golden child. They're seen as perfect, as the article says, a reflection of the parent, and anything wrong they do is seen as something wrong with them. So the parent will either blame others and emotionally humiliate the child, and the child learns from an early age that image is everything. So they kind of put the child on a pedestal, and they don't discipline the child enough, put enough balance there in terms of setting boundaries and stuff like that. But a lot of times those children are just, oh, my precious sweetheart, you can do no wrong, and they don't set any boundaries. And sometimes that does turn them into a narcissist because there's never been any boundaries or accountability set for that child, right? So the scapegoat child is often the other extreme. It's the one where the child can do no right. The child is blamed for everything. The scapegoat child is inferior to the golden child in every way. So when the golden child can do no wrong, the scapegoat child, it says, can never do anything right. This child is often called the black sheep of the family and labeled as a troublemaker who doesn't conform. Often it's the person who calls BS on the narcissistic family dynamic that becomes the scapegoat. And these roles can actually change. Because in my family, I'll be honest, I was the golden child at one time, and now I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm actively treated with active hostility by everybody in the family, but with one or two people I am, and with the others, yes, I'm kind of the scapegoat now because I call BS on a lot of stuff, and I'm not vocal about it, I don't talk about it, but I've said enough and changed my behavior enough that it's obvious. But it says spending their childhood trying to get approval from a parent, it is never enough. And that's how they become a codependent. Scapegoat children more often than not become codependents. They can never meet the parent's expectations the way the golden child does. And that does not mean the golden child is better or does anything better or is more talented or more able. There are more factors that go into it than that. So any successes or achievements are attributed to others compared to unfavorably to the or they're compared unfavorably to the golden child. Bear with me, my cat's rattling in the background. So I won't go into all of that. The next one, and keep in mind some of these can overlap. For example, often the scapegoat is the caretaker. And another one child is the caretaker child. So you had the golden child, the scapegoat, and now the caretaker child. And sentient counseling says this is the rescuer of the family. Not the same thing as the enabler. The enabler actually eggs on the narcissist. The caretaker just wants everything to be okay. And that's often a sign of codependency as well. Not always, but often. But it says they cannot tolerate conflict and will sacrifice everything, putting the needs of others before their own in order to avoid emotional turmoil. That was me. I wasn't the kind of person that would take over and try to comfort and soothe everybody and be the healer in the family, but I was more like the kind of person that went in the background and would try to stay out of conflict and would try to make myself whatever people needed me to be to avoid escalating it further. So that was kind of my style of being the caretaker. So it's not always an active thing. Sometimes it's more being in the background. But it says they have no idea how to get their own needs met, so they focus on others' needs instead. And when there is upset, they jump into rescuing and pacifying mode. So it can inadvertently enable a narcissist because you're trying to coax them instead of making them responsible for controlling their own actions if they're an adult. And so the caretaker child is often a people pleaser and often defined only by what they can do for others. Do you see how being a Christian and wanting to serve and help others and then having this role in your life already being conditioned that way can be dangerous for you in terms of your emotional health? That's why I'm always talking about the fact that we have to set boundaries and love ourselves and take care of ourselves and make sure that our motivations are good. And that's why we need to heal the root of the need to be a caretaker for these codependent reasons instead of because of our overflowing love for people, our overflowing love for God, and our enjoyment of doing things like that. Coming from a genuine place of doing these things is healthy, but when we do it because we enslave ourselves to our own emotional impulses, it's not healthy at all. And you can actually burn yourself out because you're more likely to not stop because it is an impulse. When it's a conscious choice and the motive comes from a more authentic place, you know when to stop, right? And take care of yourself and set boundaries and say, I can't do this right now, and delegate. So there's another one. It just says invisibility, but I would say the invisible child. And this is probably more the role I had. This child never receives praise or blame. I would also argue that middle children get this more, though not always. They are ignored. The narcissistic parent has no interest in them as they have no use for them. Nothing is expected of them, so more often than not, they don't even try. They will receive just enough care to conceal the level of neglect. They tend to become withdrawn and live in a private world of their own imagination. As an adult, they become very independent as they feel they have no one to rely on. That's really sad that a child is that way. But that is, like I said, children can feel, or adults can feel more than one role here. You could be the invisible child and also be the caretaker child at the same time, I think. A little bit of both. But I think I was more the invisible child, actually. Hero. The child takes on the role of the parent and becomes very responsible at an early age. They are perfectionists and aim to hide the family dysfunction by trying to be and have the best. The belief is that this will show the world that they are the product of perfect parenting. They are often critical and judgmental of others. However, they cannot take any kind of criticism themselves, as it shows a side of themselves they would rather not see. So I would think that that could be a narcissist or a codependent or just anybody. Mascot. The mascot takes responsibility for the emotional well-being and public image of the family. They become entertainers to reflect attention away from the shame and pain the family feels. I would argue that anybody in any of the roles could do this. I think even a narcissist could be a mascot because they may try to be cheerful and have these family get-togethers and do all these things for the family, but then in private they scream at people and they're abusive and they're very bossy and they're overbearing. So, it can go in multiple ways. What's on the surface might be different than what's underneath. Often they lack assertiveness and never having developed a healthy sense of self-struggle with feelings of emptiness. They support the family as a way of worshiping the narcissistic parent. In a sense, they become a closet narcissist, basking in the glory of others. That's another one. The manipulator, probably the most insidious of all the roles, is the manipulator. The manipulator is abusive and selfish, and this can be a parent or a child. They have a sense of entitlement and are both callous and opportunistic. The manipulator operates in a way that is shrewd and devious, never admitting to anything, and does enough to please the parent to get away with the abuse of others. They use others' weaknesses against them to get what they want, even if it's just sadistic pleasure. This is a role carried on in adulthood. I was a target of somebody like this who was much more powerful, bigger, and older than me, and I saw them often, and I was a target for them, and they tormented me just for pleasure. So these people do exist, and more times than not, they are a narcissist or have some kind of pathology. Let's put it that way. I'm not a psychologist. Keep in mind that I'm just educating you. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a substitute for therapeutic care if you need it, or medical care, but I'm just providing information to empower you. Okay, so those are the sibling and child roles in a narcissistic family, and I just wanted to give you a second possibility here so you can see different ways that this is set up. And so there's another article in USA Today, and it is what happens when a narcissist becomes a parent. They force their kids into these roles. And then it talks about, were you a golden child or a scapegoat? So some of the other roles in the narcissistic family. One thing that I did want to point out real quick was if you want to learn about narcissistic roles in the family and different types of narcissists, the best expert that I can recommend is Dr. Ramani. Her name is Dr. Ramani Durvasula, but she calls herself Dr. Ramani. That's Ramani, and I will put her platform in the show notes because she is the foremost authority on this. She's a psychologist, and she has so many videos, and her videos are really interesting, and she's very good at educating you about these different roles. Just be cautious about going down a rabbit hole, like I said, but Dr. Ramani is the best. She's the best at this stuff, and her book sort of categorized these before anybody else was, or before a lot of people were. And this is the ones that Durvasula, which is Dr. Ramani, and Cole, another person that she worked with, they say that children of narcissists can fulfill several other roles as well. The truth seeker. And in the USA Today article, this is, hang on just a second, who's the author? This is written by Charles Trepany, Trepany, and this is USA Today. And the different roles, other roles in a narcissistic family besides the ones I went over, are the truth seeker. That is those of us that are on this journey and we're working on healing ourselves right now. And we're the ones that are more likely to call BS. Or we just kind of sit back and we don't say anything and we observe and we know everything that's going on and we don't say much about it and we just know. But the truth-seeking child is the child that at some level gets that it's not okay, and there's a wisdom to this child, she says. This is a child who, because they see the truth, may try to soothe siblings. And then the invisible child, this is one I already talked about, is literally the child that is unseen, Cole says. It doesn't matter if they're doing well, if they're not doing well, if they're succeeding at school or failing at school, if they are engaging in positive or negative behaviors at home, they're simply not just seen. They're forgotten. They're completely overlooked. That was me, completely. That's where emotional neglect comes in. The peacekeeper. This is the kid who is trying to minimize the conflict and the fighting in the family system, who is trying to keep the system running. I would argue that a parent could be any of these roles too. You can imagine for a kid like this, there can be a lot of anxiety. The adherent. They're a big fan of the narcissistic parent. So the adherent is just another word for the enabler and or maybe even the flying monkey. They're a big fan of the narcissistic parent, Durvasula says. It almost feels culty. They've totally bought into the family, what the family is, even though no one's being nice, even though everyone's being mistreated. They may not even be consciously aware of it. But it says, as all these siblings get into adulthood, they might be the person who says, don't say that. This is our family. You shouldn't say that. You've heard that before, but it's family. And, that's usually coming from somebody who's either a narcissist, who's trying to guilt you, a flying monkey or a golden child or an adherent who wants to smooth things over and make everything okay even when it's not, even to the point of denial. Or it could be somebody who doesn't understand what's actually going on in the family and they're just overstepping their bounds, right? Now, narcissistic family dynamics. The structure of a narcissistic family dynamic. So basically, the structure of a narcissistic family dynamic is very unique among each family. So there's not one particular structure, but I wanted to go over some of the possible ways that a narcissistic family dynamic can impact those in the family, different people with different roles. So I'm going to go over one article, the Choosing Therapy article, which is basic family dynamics of a narcissistic family dynamic. And I'll discuss the different dynamics in the relationships, including when different family members, such as parents and children, take on these specific roles. And I'll include concepts like love bombing, hoovering, flying monkeys, gaslighting, smear campaigns, triangulation, and word salad. So let's look at the Choosing Therapy article. So what is a narcissistic family structure? That's the whole thing that we're talking about today, right? The narcissistic family dynamic and structure. Within a narcissistic family, Choosing Therapy says, there is usually a specific structure that keeps the homeostasis or maintenance of the family, thus continuing the enabling of the narcissist. The narcissistic individual or individuals can be anyone in the family, but is generally an adult such as a parent or grandparent. This person often has traits of or has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Because the dysfunctional family dynamics center around fulfilling this person's needs, the needs of everyone else are generally overlooked. Additionally, manipulation tactics such as blaming, disrespect, and gaslighting are commonly utilized in these families and are used to further control the control of the narcissist. So with a narcissist, it's often about control. This Choosing Therapy article, by the way, is by Katie Gillis, Kateee. Gillis, and the medical reviewer is Heidi Moad. So continuing with the article, you've got the enabler, the golden child, and the scapegoat. We've already talked about those. But I wanted to go deeper into this. How does this work in terms of the actual dynamic? They're calling it structure here, but I think it's more of a dynamic because your interactions are dynamic. And structure is more like a shape. It feels like something static. So we're talking here about something that is changing and evolving, and something that is structured around the dynamic. That's the structure itself. But the dynamic is what happens within and because of that structure. So there's 10 things that the Choosing Therapy article goes over when it comes to structure. It says a narcissistic family will often be full of deceit. Sometimes you're not even aware of it. Like I said, when I realized what was happening in my family, I was like, oh my gosh. On one level, yes, I was aware of it, of course. But on another, I had been taught that our family didn't have problems, or we had problems, but we were good people, that it was a healthy and loving family, and that that if there were any problems, I was the one with the problem. Now, I was never told that directly, but I was told that implicitly, that I was born defective and there was something wrong with me. That's why I had emotional problems, not because of anything that had happened in my childhood. And when I woke up to and realized what had happened, and that there was validity to the fact that I had been abused and neglected, maybe not in visible ways, but I had been, it was alarm bells went off in my head. And it changed my life forever in a good way. But it's been very difficult too, because I could never look at some people in my life the same way again. I couldn't. You can't go back, because if you go back, it's more painful than where you were before you even knew what was going on. You're responsible for that information. You have to work on your healing after that and accept what you have come to understand. It's hard, it's painful, but it's also empowering. So back to the narcissistic family structure, it says a narcissistic family structure will often be full of deceit, even to those who are in it, especially the survivors and the victims, emotional abuse, and multiple forms of narcissistic manipulation. These dynamics are extremely dysfunctional and harmful for any family members involved, no matter the position or, quote, role in the family system. Unhealthy communication, poor boundaries, or what we would call enmeshment, and a need for control are some signs that a family is being governed by these maladaptive behaviors. So 10 signs of a narcissistic family. Image is everything. Now, I didn't think that that was true in my family, because it was all about faith, and it was all about God, and it was all about church. But looking back, I can see how subtle it was, but it was still about, there's a narrative about what kind of family we are versus the reality of what kind of family we are. And we had to keep that narrative going about what kind of family they wanted us to think we were, instead of what kind of family we actually were. So a narcissistic family is often obsessed with creating and keeping the, quote, perfect family image. And even if it's not, they're children that think they're inherently defective, but they don't think they were abused. And they feel like there's something wrong with them, and they have depression and anxiety and signs of PTSD, but they don't believe they were abused. You need to go back and look at your childhood and question that, because chances are you probably were. Because it's that tricky, it's that slippery, it's that deceitful. So, despite perfection being unattainable and unrealistic, a narcissist's illogical false self needs the perfect image in order to present themselves appropriately to the world. And everybody else in the family, everything that they do has to serve that. Doesn't matter how much it hurts them. That was my words. So, choosing therapy number 2, lack of communication. One of the major elements of a dysfunctional family is poor communication, and a narcissistic family takes this to the extreme. Not only is there lack of communication, but the communication that does take place is often filled with triangulation and gaslighting. Triangulation is when you take two people and you turn them against each other for your own means. Gaslighting is when you make somebody doubt their own reality by getting a reaction out of them, and then when they react that way as any human would, then you say they're crazy and there's something wrong with them. And often they'll do the tormenting in private and then do something to create the reaction subtly in public, so that person explodes or has a reaction in public, and then they can say, see what I have to deal with. And they try to do what's DARVO, which is I forgot the exact acronym, but it's basically reverse, victim, and perpetrator. And so you basically somehow they find a way by the end of the conversation that when you're trying to confront them about some of their abuses, you're somehow apologizing to them. That's how it is. So these tactics are used to maintain power and control, pit family members against each other, and keep confusion and chaos within the family system. This creates anger, mistrust, confusion, and chaos. Oh, I understand chaos, all right. This further maintains the narcissist's control. So no clear boundaries is another one, also known as enmeshment. Even within a family, it's good to have healthy boundaries. There are certain things you should never do. There are certain things you should never say to each other. And there are certain boundaries and desires that people have that you should not cross or disrespect. And that's why I talk about agency so much in this podcast. Agency is your autonomy, your personal rights, your validity as a human being, that your opinion and your feelings and your existence and your importance is just as valid and real as anybody else's. So no clear boundaries. It says in any healthy social system, families included, boundaries are respected and encouraged. Boundaries are what separates one person from another, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. For example, not touching someone without their consent, not invading the personal space without their consent, and respecting topics that people are not comfortable with. However, in a narcissistic family, there are very few boundaries. There could be some. There were boundaries in my family, and some of them were respected, and others were not. And any and all boundaries are often ignored, and there is a lack of privacy for everyone but the narcissist. This is damaging to a family system because it can create enmeshment trauma, and it teaches children that their boundaries will not be respected and shows them that the world is an unsafe place. This can also cause childhood trauma and additional mental health concerns. And it can set children up for being taken advantage of in other interpersonal relationships outside of the family. And also, if they become the narcissist, doing the opposite. Number 4, surrogate spouse. Now, this one's a little messed up, but it's true. One of the less known family roles in narcissistic families is the role of, quote, surrogate spouse. This role, usually given to one of the children, exists to support the narcissistic individual's emotional needs. So we're not talking about something weird here, even though, it could be. But in most cases, it's just that the child has to fulfill and take care of the emotional needs of the adult. And children should not have to do that. It should be the other way around. So it says, because of this, the child who is the surrogate spouse is often relied on for emotional support and comforting. This places an unfair burden on a child who is not yet mature enough to handle adult feelings and responsibilities. Children who are surrogate spouses frequently struggle with unresolved anxiety, depression, and self-esteem issues. So a lot of times they're also the older sibling that takes care of all the other children in many cases. If there's a narcissistic parent and then maybe one of the parents is not there, or they have a drug problem, an addiction problem, or a severe mental health problem, that's when a lot of times the surrogate spouse child will come in and take that role. Which they shouldn't have to do, but they do. Number 5, control issues. Narcissists often exhibit control issues within the family unit. All families have different rules and expectations for those within the family. For example, some cultures, older generations expect the children do not question adults, as this is seen as disrespectful. However, respect for elders is much different than the expectation within narcissistic family systems. In these families, no one can question anything, no matter how dysfunctional, bizarre, or uncomfortable something may be. To question is to undermine the authority of the narcissist, which they take as a threat. So that's control issues, and they may control what you do, too. Number 6, not good enough messages. Not good enough messages. When a developing child isn't provided with unconditional love and value, the child learns that love from their parents only comes if they are, quote, good enough. Whatever that might mean to the parent, whether it's looks, academic achievements, career achievements, the work they do in the home, taking care of everybody, or whatever it might be, their behavior. But it says narcissistic families continually send the message that the children are not adequate, which contributes to poor self-esteem, self-image, self-respect, and self-compassion. They may be also taught that they need the narcissist in order to make decisions or to survive, because they are taught that they will always mess up, and when they don't listen to the narcissist and follow their guidance, that's bad, basically. Number 7, unhealthy competition. In these families, siblings and other family members are often pitted against each other through unhealthy competition. It's reinforced through the unhealthy communication dynamic, dysfunctional dynamics within the family, and the family roles that are reinforced through the family system. Often children of these families struggle to develop healthy relationships and attachments to others. Number 8, secret keeping. Secrets are one of the major elements of a narcissistic family. And this is something that I'm sharing a little more here than I usually do. I'm not going to be specific. But in the past, I might not have been aware of secrets, but there weren't that many as far as I could tell. Now, my family is so riddled with secrets and keeping things from each other, and, well, don't tell this person this, and, well, I know this about that person, and then, or sharing stuff that they're not supposed to me, that I didn't want the burden of knowing. There's so much of that in my family, I can't even keep up with it all. But it says secrets are the major elements of a narcissistic family system. Each member is expected to keep secrets in order to maintain the ideal public image that is protected. The biggest secret is the fact that the family is dysfunctional, which is hidden at every cost. Deception is reinforced through family roles, manipulation, and denial that is reinforced by the family members. Now, one of the first YouTube videos I ever did was the destructive power of denial. The destructive power of denial. So denial is more than a river in Egypt. And a lot of people that is one of the most hideously dysfunctional parts of a family dynamic. And that, I think, is what left me in the dark for so long. That I was involuntarily in denial because I'd been taught that denial, because I'd been told all those things never happened and weren't true. So I believed it because that was the root of everything I'd ever believed, because that was my family. So that was literally the core of my belief system. So even as I became exposed to other ways of doing things and other ideas, I still couldn't see it for so long. But then I finally was able to see it one day. Literally one day I saw it and was like, oh my God, So if you like, I will put it in the show notes, and you can go to that older video, The Destructive Power of Denial, and watch that. And it'll tell you exactly how destructive denial is. So adults are number 9 in the Choosing Therapy article. Adults are emotionally reactive. We all have reactions sometimes, but this is talking about a pattern. It says survivors of narcissistic families understand all too well that the adults frequently behave worse than the children. While it is understandable for children to be emotionally reactive, narcissistic parents often behave this way with limited insight into their behavior and little remorse for how their behavior affects others. Number 10, blackmail is common. Not surprisingly, your feelings can be used against you. Vulnerabilities will be exploited to further the narcissist's control. If a child shares that they are scared or embarrassed, this can be used against them as a way to establish dominance and remind the child who is in control. And then the person says, within my practice, I've come across clients who have told me how they shared information with a parent in confidence, only for it to be used publicly to ridicule them as punishment for a recent mishap. I've had that happen, but not with a parent, in a very vicious way. But clients are then humiliated and realize that even their parents were cruel and unsafe. And so that is some of a narcissistic family structure. That's some signs of a narcissistic family structure. I wanted to go over those with you so you could see some of the signs and not only know that it's there, but know what to look for so you can start to deconstruct this if you're experiencing this in your own life, to empower you, to educate you, and to help you to understand it more. And then, so some of the other roles of, general roles of a narcissistic family dynamic, For example, the narcissist or the manipulator is usually what everything revolves around. It's the one that causes all the chaos. Not that there's not problems in any family without a narcissist, even some chaos and dysfunction. I think we all have it. Like I said, this is on a spectrum. It's not black and white. And so there are people that have higher narcissistic tendencies, but you can still get along with them most of the time, but maybe they just have some emotional problems. And then there might be people with emotional problems that don't have narcissistic qualities. And then there might be people with high narcissistic qualities that tend to get along well with people because they've learned the behaviors, even if they don't have the emotional connection with people, but they've learned the behaviors of how to operate in society. So you have high functioning narcissists, and you might even be able to have a relationship with them, but they might not be your best friend. And then you have the codependent. That's usually the caretaker, the person who tries to smooth things over, the person who tries to make themselves whatever the narcissist or the stronger, more dominant people in the family want them to be, or they perceive that they want them to be. That's why communication is important. You can have one person who has a strong personality and another person who's more laid back and more quiet. And that doesn't mean that there's a narcissist and a codependent there. And they may get along well, and their opposites may complement one another. They may bring that high-strung person down a level, and then the more outgoing, dominant person may teach the codependent, or not the codependent, but the quiet person to be more outspoken and to have more confidence. So there's a dynamic there that can be healthy, but when it's taken to an extreme on those ranges of narcissism, that's when you get into abuse and stuff like that. So flying monkeys are another one, and enablers. Flying monkeys and enablers are the ones that bow down to the narcissist, do their bidding, try to keep everybody else in line, and try to do the bidding of the narcissist themselves, where the narcissist can't or won't do it themselves towards the other people in the family who are either scared or not saying anything, or even trying to fight against these dynamics because they're the truth seeker, right? We're truth seekers in this podcast, so that's an actual role here. So that is the general roles in a narcissistic family dynamic. And now let's look at some of the unwritten rules of a narcissistic family dynamic. There's another article in Psychology Today that talks about this. And so the rules here, though, are things that you won't question or think there's anything wrong with if you've been told they're normal. And that's what I was told, and that was my experience. I'll say it again because this is really important. You won't question these dynamics at first or think there's anything wrong with them, at least consciously. On an unconscious level, you might, if you're told your whole life that they're normal. This is where gaslighting comes in. It may not even be intentional gaslighting. It's often unconscious by the people that do it because they're trying to cover up their flaws and they're scared to be exposed. So, and then you will think you are the problem. When you're the child, you'll grow up thinking you're the problem because you'll be taught that implicitly or explicitly. So that's where the gaslighting comes in, and you will think you are the problem. So let's look at this unwritten rules of narcissistic family dynamic, because I think this might be the most important part of all of it. So there is, in the Psychology Today article by Julie L. Hall, the 12 rules of a dysfunctional narcissistic family. So acceptance is conditional and you must take sides, is what she says. But a couple of things to note here, key points. Narcissistic homes often have unspoken, so it's unconscious, and there's denial sometimes that those even exist, even when you question them, bring them up, or ask about them. Sometimes the narcissist or other people in the family will either be aware of them and deny them, or not be aware of them and thus deny them because they don't know they exist. So they're often unspoken, and I would also argue sometimes unconscious rules of engagement that dictate interactions among family members. So narcissistic homes often have unspoken rules of engagement that dictate interactions among family members. Some of these rules may include submitting to the dominant narcissist authority and taking sides. And in these families, rage is often normalized and denial may be rampant. So the unspoken rules. Acceptance is conditional. To gain acceptance, children must comply with the family narrative. There's a family narrative, and like I said, it usually doesn't run right on the surface. You have to dig and burrow down and then move forward. There's a thread or a narrative there that runs underneath the surface and is unconscious, because people will deny, in these families will deny that these things exist. That's why you have to look at the evidence, not what people say. Look at the evidence of behavior behavior, of dynamics, of experiences. Trust your emotions, trust your red flags, trust yourself that if something is wrong, it probably is. I'm not talking about paranoia. There are people that are paranoid. I'm talking about genuine things that are happening that people will say don't happen. So it says to gain acceptance, children must comply with the family narrative and value system. Expressions of differences are rejected and pathologized. I had anxiety and depression growing up really bad, and I was told that I must have been born with them. And even though some people may have a propensity towards them, I was not born with those things. I can tell you that now. And I believe that. I thought I was defective. I thought there was something wrong with me. And I didn't realize it was what had been done to me and the circumstances that I was in that had created those dynamics in my own mind. And I had to take responsibility for that, but it was not my fault. And so if this is happening to you, this is not your fault if that happened in your family. I'll say it again. It's not your fault. So number 2, submission is required. Everyone is expected to submit to the dominant narcissist authority, no matter how ignorant, arbitrary, cruel, or destructive it is. Number 3, someone must be blamed for problems. When something bad happens, from a lost job to a spilled glass of milk, someone must be blamed for it. And I found that in my own life that I project that behavior because I grew up in that dynamic, and now when something goes wrong, I have to blame somebody. And I'll be honest, God forgive me, but I often blamed God. And my relationship with God has been strained, and I'm working to rehabilitate it. And I want to work on that enough that I can create a course for you on it too, because this is taboo. People don't want to talk about this, but there are so many Christians that are so pissed off at God. They blame God. They hate God. They're mad at God. And yet they love Him and worship Him and want to follow Him and obey Him at the same time. It's so messed up. And I want to help you to heal that. And I do plan on creating a course about restoring our emotional relationship with God and working on the projection from the abuse that we experienced that we project onto God. Because that automatically happens. We project whatever we've been taught. And so a lot of times when bad things happen, we blame God, even if God had nothing to do with it. So here it says, typically there is a family scapegoat who is made to bear the main burden of the family's problems, frustrations, and unhappiness, as well as the dominant narcissist projected. See, they projected their self-loathing onto you, and then you project that onto something or someone else. So you need someone to blame because you're taught that. Number 4, vulnerability is dangerous. Mistakes, accidents, and weaknesses, even ones you take responsibility for, are cause for shaming treatment that can persist for years. Number 5, you must take sides. Just as there is always blame and shame, there are always sides. In other words, instead of being a family and let's work this out together and let's problem solve here, let's instead point fingers and blame. And I saw that a lot growing up. Well, you did this and you did that. And sometimes it's just bickering. Sometimes it's just silly bickering and squabbling. I get that. And it doesn't really cause any long-term damage. But when it happens all the time or when it gets really ugly, it can be very bad. It says, if you are not the dominant narcissist side, you are wrong. Children often feel forced to choose between parents, siblings, and other family members. Number 6, there is never enough love and respect to go around. Renewable resources in healthy families, love and respect, are limited to the narcissist and whomever else is deemed worthy, usually a favored golden child. Respect for one person means disrespect for another. So in other words, it's black and white. It's either or. You're either in or you're out. And love and respect, yes, there's no shortage of those. In a place where there's love, there's no shortage of any of those. But in a narcissistic family, there is a shortage of those. And so people don't get any. So number 7, feelings are wrong. Now, when we talk about, I'm not a parent, okay? So I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what it's like to raise children. I have family members and who have children. I have kept and babysat children. And but I know this from my own childhood, but when a child has a tantrum or something happens where their emotions are, maybe they're misbehaving and their emotions are misplaced, telling them that their feelings are wrong does not help. You can set a boundary, tell them the kind of behavior that they need to have, help them work through their emotion, and explain to them why their behavior needs to be changed, and still validate their feelings as a human being. if that makes sense. So you can say somebody's feelings are valid and still show them a better way to respond, right? You can do that for yourself too, and that's what healing is all about. So in a narcissistic family, though, feelings are wrong. The feelings that make us human, help us connect and get our needs met, and protect us from harm are selfish and must be repressed. Only the narcissist has free reign to express their feelings, have emotional reactions, and make demands. So they're like a black hole that everything else in the family revolves around. Number 8, competition, not cooperation, rules the day. One-upmanship, favoritism, and constant comparison create a harshly competitive environment that undermines trust and breeds hostility and betrayal. Number 9, appearances are more important than substance. Even if everyone is suffering, they must smile for the family photo. I wish I could say that didn't literally happen for me, but it did. I remember a photo like that. Number 10, rage is normalized. Everyone is expected to swallow and endure the dominant narcissist's irrational, explosive, and perhaps also violent rage. This may be magnified by other forms of mental illness and or addiction. Number 11, this is one I've honed in a lot. Denial is rampant. To sustain the dominant narcissist's control over the family, there is denial of abusive incidents, the continual atmosphere of fear, the ongoing mistreatment of the scapegoat, and routine forms of neglect. So let me repeat that one. Denial is rampant. So if you're knowing something is wrong when you were growing up and you have mental health issues, but you were told that there was nothing wrong, here are some things you might want to look at in your own family, journal about them, pray about them, talk to a therapist about them, and just get these out and get clarity on them. Abusive incidents, the continual atmosphere of fear, the ongoing mistreatment of the scapegoat. Could that have been you? I'm not trying to put ideas in your head. If it didn't happen, it didn't happen. But look at the evidence. Look at the patterns. Look at what happened over time. And routine forms of neglect. That doesn't mean you were starved or you didn't go to the doctor or you didn't go to school or you never had a family vacation. You may have had all those things. But we're also talking about emotional neglect. We're also talking about human interaction and things like that. Number 12, there is no safety. Although the scapegoat is targeted with the most abuse, everyone is on hyper alert because no one is safe from blame and rage. So those are the 12 unspoken rules of a narcissistic family. Acceptance is conditional. Submission is required. Someone must be blamed for problems, except for me if I'm the narcissist, right? Vulnerability is dangerous. Keep in mind that vulnerability can be healthy in a safe environment and even necessary. Well, Brene Brown talks about that, right? You must take sides, number 5. Number 6, there is never enough love and respect to go around. Number 7, feelings are wrong. Number 8, competition, not cooperation, rules the day. That's where you might see a lot of finger pointing and name calling and blaming instead of if there's a problem. Well, let's figure out a way to solve this. What are we going to do? Number 9, appearances are more important than substance. So there's shallowness there. Number 10, rage is normalized. Number 11, denial is rampant. And number 12, there is no safety. So those are the 12 rules of a dysfunctional narcissistic family by Julie Hall in Psychology Today. And that just gives you an idea of some of the rules that you might have had in your family if you were brought up in a narcissistic family with that kind of dynamic. And that can help you to start deconstructing that and understanding those different components and seeing the connections between those behaviors and dynamics and how that impacted you. And then take it a step further and think about how you're having behaviors and beliefs and emotions now because of your PTSD that were caused by that. Once you understand that, then you can start knowing where to target it and release it, right? So the last thing I wanted to talk about is when a sibling is a narcissist and when a parent is a narcissist. So when a sibling is a narcissist and when a parent is a narcissist, to wrap up this talk. All right, thank you for following me so far. Let's go ahead and look at that. There are 2 articles. One of them is When a Sibling is a Narcissist. This is in the Taylor Counseling Group, and it's by Taylor Counseling Group, Dr. Christopher Taylor, and it's the impact of a narcissistic sibling. The impact of a narcissistic sibling. Signs that you have a narcissistic sibling. So when you have a sibling that's a narcissist, or you may have a parent that's a narcissist, or both in some cases. So ways to think back on growing up with your sibling, it says, here are a few questions you can ask to determine whether or not they showed narcissistic tendencies. Keep in mind, we're not trying to label people here. We're not trying to diagnose people. I'm not trying to diagnose people. I'm talking more about behaviors and patterns. But it says, did they have empathy for you and others? Were they ever cruel or threatening? Also, again, look for patterns, not for isolated incidents as much. Did you feel scared or on edge around them? Were they envious or highly competitive? Did they ever try to control or manipulate you? So they may do some of these things, but not all of them, or maybe worse in one area than another. So most narcissists maintain control in a manipulative, emotional way with mind games. For example, they may gaslight you, making you feel guilty after they've done something wrong. They might use triangulation, where they use a third person to take their side and pressure or control you. So if you grew up with a narcissistic sibling, you are likely, you may have felt like you were always walking on eggshells. How they affect your mental health. They thrive on bullying. Sometimes they can be openly aggressive. Sometimes it can be more hidden in some ways. They'll twist a situation so you end up apologizing for how they made you feel, is an example of that. In sibling relationships, there's also often trauma bonding, and I'm going to do, or will have done, a talk on this as well. I'm trying to cover a lot of these areas that are similarly connected so that these can all come out around the same time. But it says, for some people, growing up with a narcissistic sibling may start a pattern of trauma bonding. Your sibling may think they love you, but then turn around and treat you like a piece of trash. Trauma bonding is a result of emotional abuse and manipulation, where the perpetrator hurts you, but then follows up with positive reinforcement like kindness or acceptance. It is a complete mind game. Because the victim wants the positive results that come after the abuse, they'll continue to allow more abuse. Over time, it becomes more and more difficult to see reality and break this cycle of trauma bonding. So one reason that you're in this family dynamic and you cannot be aware of it even when you're studying this stuff is because you're so immersed in it, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? So it goes on and talks about how you might have low self-esteem if you had a narcissistic sibling. Impact on parental relationships. It says sometimes your sibling is narcissistic because they copied the behavior of a parent. That's very common, and that's why you may have more than one. If one or both of your parents had narcissistic tendencies in addition to a sibling, you may have been scapegoated by the whole family. So in some cases, you may be the only person that's not a narcissist or doesn't have those tendencies. Recognizing and creating boundaries for yourself is the first step towards healing from this kind of toxic family dynamic. But that doesn't mean that there may have been other people that were not like that in your family too. So I'm not saying everybody's like that. So it says, however, your sibling may have been the only family member with narcissistic tendencies. So they may have manipulated your parents or other relatives as well. So dealing with narcissistic sibling relationships, that's difficult. It says what's more important is to remember that narcissists, who the narcissist is, and that you cannot change them. The best thing you can do is create boundaries to protect yourself in the relationship. With siblings, this can often feel like betrayal of the whole family. However, a hard boundary is sometimes the only way to keep yourself safe from falling back into past patterns of manipulation and abuse. Ask yourself, how much interaction can you handle with your sibling right now, and actively pursue healing this sense of self. So, I'm going to tell you this straight up. If somebody is that messed up, and every time you end up back around them, you fall into old patterns, you get anxious, you get antsy, you're scared, you're angry, you're flustered, you react. If you're around somebody who sets you off like that consistently and you never feel safe around them and you're always walking on eggshells around them, they are going to try to make you guilty when you set a boundary. And chances are, when you set a boundary, they're going to try to plow right through it. You know why? I understand it from experience. You have to set a hard line in the sand and do not let up. They will try to wear you down over time. I'm talking about the extreme people, okay? They will try to wear you down over time. Do not let them. Hold the line and hold it permanently. Hold the line and hold it permanently. Do not let them weasel their way back into your life if they're that extremely dysfunctional, toxic, and cruel. It is not worth it. You are not betraying them. You are not betraying your family, because there is no way to have a functional relationship with somebody like that. That is not your fault. You cannot change them. There is nothing you can do about it. That is harsh, but it's true. And that's okay. You can love yourself and set a boundary and say no. And when that person tries to manipulate their way back in, do not fall for it. You can gray rock them. Gray rocking is when you say yes, no, you're courteous. You talk about neutral topics. You don't get into anything personal. Do not give them any information or share any emotions with them. You sort of keep a blank demeanor that's just courteous and straightforward. And that, if you do have to interact, that's the best way to be. Like, hey, how are you doing? It's hot today, isn't it? That was a great meal that we had. You just keep it very casual and very impersonal. And if they try to drag you in, pull it back. Don't let them. Do not let them. So those are some of the things that happen if you happen to have a sibling that is a narcissist. So last one, let's talk about what happens if you have a parent that's a narcissist. Narcissistic parents, traits, signs, and how to deal with one. So this is Choosing Therapy. This is another Choosing Therapy article called Narcissistic Parents, Traits, Signs, and How to Deal with One. And it's by Nekpangi Thomas, and the medical reviewer is Pat Bass III. Okay, and this is in Choosing Therapy. And it says, narcissistic parents are incredibly possessive, critical, and controlling of their children. These parents fear children becoming independent and will humiliate or shame them to prevent this from happening. Being raised by narcissistic parents may result in poor self-esteem, overachieving tendencies, or self-sabotaging behavior in adulthood. So a narcissistic parent, talking about somebody with extreme narcissistic qualities or narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic mothers and fathers may manifest these traits in unique ways. And I do want to talk more about the dynamics when you have a narcissistic mother, a narcissistic father, a narcissistic brother, a narcissistic sister, and sons and daughters as well. In the future, I want to break these down even more with the family dynamics, because they are different based on gender, but not always. It's just that there are certain tendencies that tend to come out more with men maybe than with women, and vice versa. Okay, so common traits of narcissistic parents: inflated sense of self-importance, it says, constantly seeking to be more successful than others, sense of entitlement, desire to associate with people of high status, need for excessive admiration, exploitation of others for personal gain, lack of empathy, and arrogant behaviors and attitudes. Signs of a narcissistic parent. There's 23. I will not go into detail about these, so let me just list them. They need to be the center of attention, even if they take it from their child. You're supposed to lift up your child and give them attention, right? Nope, not with the narcissist. Number 2, they are immature and selfish. Number 3, they blame others for their own behaviors. Think about how this works with a parent and a child when this happens. Number 4, they show little concern for others' needs or their children's needs or feelings. Number 5, they play favorites, maybe even among their children. Number 6, they use you, their child, for personal gain. Number 7, they are manipulative and exploitative. Like maybe if a parent gets older and a child has to distance themselves from the parent because they're so abusive emotionally, and then they come and visit maybe 3 times a year instead of once a month, the mom will be like, oh, I'm getting older and you're just leaving me and I'm so neglected and I'm so lonely. It's not like a genuine desire that she's expressing. It's like the way she does it. She's trying to get you to come back in more because she wants you to control you, right? And manipulate you and make you feel bad. Now, if you are in a situation where you just can't be around that person because they're abusive, that's understandable. That's different than just neglecting an older parent who isn't that way, that isn't really abusive, or maybe they're just quirky. Number 8, they are obsessed with maintaining the family's image, or their perceived image usually. Number 7, they use guilt trips to get what they want, just what I was saying, right? Fear, obligation, and guilt. F.O.G is an acronym. Fear, obligation, and guilt. Narcissists use that a lot. And it's used to exploit Christians and Christian empaths especially. Again, I have or will put out a podcast episode on that. I will put it in the show notes if you want to learn more about guilt tripping and how to protect yourself from it. Fear, obligation, and guilt is called F.O.G, and that's exactly what it does to your mind. But it says guilt tripping is an emotional manipulation technique narcissists use to inflate their ego and feel superior. This behavior also allows them to maintain constant power and control. Narcissistic parents may guilt trip children into giving in to demands or meeting expectations. For example, they may see a child as ungrateful if their child refuses to complete a certain task. Number 10, their love is conditional. With parents, love should not come with conditions and terms, it says. However, narcissistic parents view love as an exploitation tool. So, in other words, their relationship with their children, instead of being unconditional love, is transactional. Your relationship with your kids should not be transactional unless, like I said, if you're setting a boundary, it may have to be. But that's different because that person has made it where there's no other way to do it, right? For the people that are trying to tolerate that person and still maintain some kind of contact, if that's possible. Number 11, they will do anything to be, quote, the best. Number 12, they put you down and lower your confidence. Number 13, they are neglectful and never present when needed. In other words, when they need you, you sure as hell better be there. But when they need you, forget about it. It don't matter. Number 14, they limit your time together. And that's not about setting healthy boundaries. That's about they won't spend time with their children if it doesn't fit their personal agenda. They may also restrict family time to manipulate children into fulfilling their needs and requests. Number 15, they are allowed to be emotional, but you are not. Number 16, they become annoyed when asked for attention. So if you're a child and you ask for attention, all parents are going to get annoyed when they're tired, they're busy, there's so much going on. But this is a pattern, and it's like the main reaction that they have. Number 17, they are codependent. Number 18, they publicly embarrass you. Number 19, they have poor boundaries and overstep yours. You better respect theirs, but don't you dare sit any with them. Number 20, they are extremely jealous and possessive of others. They might be the kind with their spouse where if the person is even having a friendly conversation with somebody of the opposite sex in public in a harmless way, they'll think that person, they're having an affair. It's ridiculous stuff that they think. Number 21, they view you as a source of validation. In other words, you're their supply for them to feel better about themselves. Number 22, they expect you to play the caregiver role. Number 23, they gaslight you. So, they covertly sow seeds of doubt in a targeted individual, making them question their own memory, perception, or judgment. Let me slow down on number 23. This is the last one. Narcissistic gaslighting is part of the denial family narrative. So gaslighting doesn't just happen from one individual to another. It can happen unconsciously and unintentionally, or consciously and intentionally with a group towards one person, or a larger group towards a smaller group of people in a family. So also in cultural systems this happens, but it's a form of manipulation in which a person or group covertly or secretly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual, making them question their own memory, perception, or judgment. I was the person that got forgotten about, ignored, and neglected, and I just stayed out of the way for the most part. But I would still behave and act the way people wanted me to, so I could keep my head down and keep safe, right? So this is what happened to me. Seeds of doubt were planted, and I was the one person that seemed to be aware of what was going on, and so they needed to make sure that I questioned my memory, my perception, and my judgment. For example, a gaslighting parent is when they deny some experiences from the past, invalidating their child's feelings about the event. Oh, that never happened, or you must be remembering that wrong, or something like that. Or, well, if you've got mental health issues, it wasn't because of how you were raised or the environment you were in or how you were treated. It's because of you. You were born that way. You know, you probably just have mental health issues. Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes they don't just straight out say, there's something wrong with you, but it's implied. That's why you have to be really, really aware of this. So I'm going to put another source. I'm putting a lot of resources in this one, okay? But I'm going to put a book in there. And if you only ever read two books on this topic, one, you need to read The Body Keeps the Score. That's about how trauma happens and how to heal it. And that is the first book I recommend to a lot of people. The Body Keeps the Score, and it's by Bessel van der Kolk. I'll put his name so you can see how it's spelled and the title in the show notes. The other one that I would recommend you get, if this is all sounding too familiar, is to check out Shannon Thomas, Healing from Hidden Abuse. So that has been Family Roles and Relationships in Narcissistic Family Dynamics, and this is a YouTube video. We talked about children and sibling roles in the narcissistic family dynamic. We talked about narcissistic family dynamics, such as the structure of a narcissistic family dynamic, general roles in a narcissistic family dynamic, unwritten rules of one, when a sibling is a narcissist, and when a parent is a narcissist. I've recommended a lot of resources. Check those out as you're able. The ones that really resonate with you and stand out to you that you feel will be most helpful, start with those. Don't overwhelm yourself. Do a little bit at a time. And as always, remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. If this happened to you, it's not your fault. Remember that God loves you. And if you feel like God has been unkind to you and has not loved you and has not given you the life that you believe you deserve, I'm not going to blame you, sit here and blame you and tell you you shouldn't feel that way. I felt that way. I understand what that feels like. I feel for you. I love you. But know that you also have a lot of distorted thinking that has seeped into your mind because you've been immersed in it. And you're going to project without meaning to. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't beat on yourself for this. But you will project a lot of that abuse that you experienced and the neglect you experienced onto what you perceive as happening in the world, and that God is doing those things to you, whether by omission or commission. We project so much onto God, but I promise you, God is loving, God is sovereign, God is good, God wants good things for you, God loves you, and God does not do those things to you. God is not a narcissist. God does not do those things to you. God loves you, and you matter, you're treasured, you're valid, your feelings are valid, they're real, what happened to you is real, and I see you, and God loves you. So we're going to work on this platform and in this channel how to heal our relationship with God, especially the projecting of narcissistic behavior onto God, because the authority figures in our lives did that to us in many cases, even in religious communities. Is so messed up. There's so much deconstruction that needs to happen. And when I say deconstruction, I don't necessarily mean quit being a Christian. That's not what I'm saying. But deconstruction emotionally and mentally and cognitively of that projection that happens unintentionally. It's so sad and it's so messed up. I have been a victim and a survivor of it myself, and I'm still just working through the beginning. So in time, I will take what I'm learning and what I'm working on and come up with some resources and come up with resources for you that are made specifically for this platform. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening. I know this was long. Thank you for following along with me. I hope it's been helpful. If you haven't, click the subscribe bell and you'll get notifications for all the new podcasts and all the new episodes of the YouTube channel. And also, if you'd like to contribute on Patreon or Ko-Fi, I'll put those in the show notes and all the resources as well. Thank you so much and have a great day.